Probably my most commonly asked question slash the most common Instagram DM that I get is, Rachel, I want to get into reading, but I don't know where to start. What are your recommendations? So today I have gone all out. I have recommendations for a bunch of different genres. I have a very large selection of my favorite books and the ones that I would recommend to my friends. A lot of these I have recommended to my friends and they've also really enjoyed them. And so I'm just going to give you the whole rundown, basically. I've broken it down into a few different genres, so depending if you want to read romance or mystery or non-fiction, I have all the recommendations. And at the end, I'll go through probably like my top 3 or my top 5 if you just want to know my absolute top recommendations, just like overall. Obviously, I know that everyone's going to have different preferences and different opinions on the books that they read. I think that's what makes reading fun and what makes booktube fun, because we can all discuss our different opinions and different thoughts. And obviously, I can only talk from my own experience and from my own opinions. If you don't agree, that's so fine. But these are the books that I have found that seem to be the biggest crowd pleasers. I haven't included books that I know a lot of people won't like, even if I've loved them. These are just the ones that I think will probably be the most well-rounded and loved by the majority of people. Starting off with a bit of a fun genre, rom-coms. Don't confuse rom-coms with romance. To me, they are very separate genres, and I feel like people seem to naturally prefer one over the other. I much prefer romance as a whole compared to rom-coms, but I feel like if you just want to get into reading and you don't want something super heavy or emotionally draining, rom-coms are your best friend. And I'm very picky with rom-coms because so many of them to me are so cringy and like beyond cheesy that I just don't enjoy them. But these are ones that A, I loved, B, were cute, and C, actually made me laugh. Starting off with The Love Hypothesis, this one is so fun. Very easy to read, very cute, very funny, very likable characters. I'll try and give very brief rundowns of what each book is about. This one is about 2 scientists, Olive and Adam, and Olive is trying to convince her best friend that she is over her ex-boyfriend, and to do that she randomly kisses one of the other scientists in the lab, not even knowing who it is, and it turns out to be Adam. And Adam is known in the lab by all of the other scientists to be extremely grumpy, extremely strict, extremely like follow the rules, and everyone is shocked by the pairing of the two. But they end up starting this fake relationship because they both can benefit from it, and it's just a really fun story, but it does still have depth to it, which I really like. Another one that I absolutely love, and one that I feel like doesn't get enough hype, at least from what I've seen, is Second First Impressions by Sally Thorne. This is the author of The Hating Game, which is another really popular rom-com. I actually didn't love that one, but I adored this. If you think you are similar to me in terms of your personality and things that you love, I think you would absolutely love this. In this story, we have Ruthie, who is in her mid-20s, but she works in a retirement village and also lives there too. It's kind of like part of the package of her job. She loves her routine. She loves going to bed early. She kind of fits in with the older people, like a very old soul, which I love. Very like goody two-shoes, follows the rules, blah. And then one day, this guy shows up. His name is Teddy. He's a tattoo artist and he rides a motorcycle, so kind of the total opposite of Ruthie. But he ends up getting a job at the retirement village working as kind of like an assistant for 2 of the residents who are just like so funny. This story is just the perfect amount of fun and depth and character development, and it's all just so lovely. It definitely does lean more towards cheesy and could get cringy at times, but in my opinion, it's so good. Moving on to romance. Usually when a book is romance but not a rom-com, it's a lot more hard-hitting, it's a lot more emotionally deep, and it will often make you cry. I love these stories. I feel like the love that you can read about is just so phenomenal, and here are my top picks. Firstly, one of my favorite books in the entire world is Archer's Voice. It is just such a heartbreaking yet heartwarming story. In this story we have Bree and Archer, and it's a dual POV, which means you get to read from both of the main characters' perspectives, which I love because you can really see what's going on inside of their heads. And in this story we have Bree, who has gone through something really difficult in her hometown, and she just needs to get out, to clear her head, to kind of just start afresh and be able to really I guess, move on with her life. So she is trying to get away from her hometown, moves to this little tiny beach town, I guess. She rents a house, she gets a job, and then she meets Archer. They randomly bump into each other one day. She introduces herself, she says hello, and he just doesn't respond. She immediately thinks he's just super rude, but she's still really intrigued by him, and so she asks some people at her work, like, hey, do you know this guy? I ran into him, he didn't even speak to me, it was so weird. And they were like, oh, it must be Archer. He can't speak. He went through some stuff a while ago, and ever since then, no one has heard him speak. And this just makes Bree even more intrigued. She also finds out that a lot of people in the town don't really like Archer. She can't really figure out why. He just seems to be a bit of a social outcast. So she decides that she wants to become his friend. So it's a bit of a friends to lovers. It's a really beautiful healing story, seeing them both go through their trauma and what they've been through in the past, and I guess just two broken people finding love, which is just like my absolute favorite thing ever. Cannot recommend this enough, but definitely a very hard-hitting story, very emotional, probably will make you cry. Maybe check trigger warnings if you think that could be an issue, but so worth it. And the other one that I have is Love in Other Words by Christina Lauren. This is super hyped on the internet, but well worth it in my opinion. This is another friends to lovers, but it's childhood best friends to lovers. You get to see the two characters from children to teenagers and as they grow older. I need to not talk so much, so a very basic synopsis is they're best friends, and as they get older they kind of start to fall in love with each other, but something happens that separates them, and I think they're apart for about a decade, but they somehow end up back in each other's lives, and they have to figure out what to do. There is so much more to the story, obviously, but again, super hard hitting, but super heartwarming. Definitely recommend this one. Moving on to Coho. Yes, she does get her own genre because I couldn't narrow it down enough. I do think I need to make a whole Coho recommendations and like ranking video where I go through these more in depth, but I always get questions from you guys saying that you want to start reading Colleen Hoover but you don't know which book to start with. At this point I have read 14 Colleen Hoover books, and here's what I would say very briefly. It Ends With Us is probably her most hyped book, and it's definitely one of my personal favorites. It seems to be a little bit hit and miss. Some people love it, some people don't. I think it's absolutely phenomenal, and it was one of the first books that I read that just got me so hooked and so in love with the characters, so in love with the storyline, broke my heart, put it back together. It was just absolutely phenomenal to me. I loved it, but I also know that not everyone loves it, so I would personally recommend it. There are definitely trigger warnings. Pretty much in all of Coho's books there are trigger warnings, so definitely check that out if you think that would be helpful to you. Pretty much all of her books include something that is very deep, very emotional, and things that could be distressing for readers, so just be aware of that. November 9, which now has a much cuter cover, buy the new one, not this one, is probably my favorite concept by her. It's about two people who meet every November 9th for the day for about 5 years in a row ish, and they're not allowed to contact each other in between those times. They don't have each other on social media, anything like that, and for that reason it's just one of my favorite stories because it's so unrealistic but so intriguing, and there's also a huge plot twist in this one which usually shocks people. Definitely recommend this one. It's not my absolute favorite but still love. Heartbones is one of my personal faves. I don't hear as much about it and I haven't seen as many people rate it as highly as I did, but I just personally love reading about two broken people who find healing and love with each other, and that's exactly what this is. And the last Coho that I want to mention is Reminders of Him, which is actually her newest book, but I honestly think that this is one of the best ones to start with because it doesn't touch on as many trigger warning kind of subjects as some of her other ones do. It is definitely emotional and a beautiful love story, but it just doesn't have that intensity or like shock factor that some of her others do. So I think it's a great place to start because you get to understand her writing, how she writes her stories, how she writes her characters, but I don't feel like it ruins your life in the same way that some of her others do. So I personally think that this is one of the best places to start. Honestly, just do whatever you want. Read a bunch of the synopsises, go look them up, read about the storylines, see which one appeals most to you and see which one seems most interesting to you. I haven't read any of hers that I think are necessarily bad yet, but I do obviously have ones that I prefer more than others, but everyone's different, so just start with whatever appeals most to you. Okay, let's talk thrillers. One of my personal favorites is The Woman in the Window, which I'm actually currently lending out to a friend because, like I said, these are books that I would recommend to my friends in real life. This was a 5-star read for me. It had me hooked the whole time. I read it in like 2 days. I couldn't put it down. I just really wanted to know what was going to happen happen. This one is about a woman who has agoraphobia, hopefully I'm saying that right, which means that she is too scared to leave her house. So she is just stuck inside all day, and she kind of fills her time doing various things, but one of the things that she fills her time with is spying on her neighbors. And one day she's spying on her neighbors, just kind of having a look, I guess, seeing what everyone's up to, and she sees what she thinks is a murder. And the story just goes on from there. Basically, no one believes her, and there's just this whole rundown of events, and it's super fast paced, super exciting, and definitely recommend. The next one that I have to recommend is A Silent Patient. This is definitely one of my favorite thrillers, and I think it's the perfect thriller to start with if you haven't read many before. I think that if I read it now, I would find it a little bit more predictable and a little bit less exciting, but at the time I hadn't read a lot of thrillers before, and it had me so hooked. Again, read it in like, I think 24 hours, and this is one that I constantly recommend to other people, and so many people that I've recommended it to have come back to me being like, oh my gosh, I've never read a book that quickly, that was so good. That one is about a woman who shoots her husband and never speaks again. She's put away in basically like a mental hospital, and a therapist shows up one day and is like, I really think I can get her to talk. So you get to read from the therapist's perspective, but you also get to read entries from the woman's diary, so you kind of get to see inside her brain as well. Very interesting, major plot twist at the end. Could not recommend it enough. It is just so good. And the last thriller that I recommend is Verity by Colleen Hoover, and the reason that I didn't include it in my earlier coho chat with you guys is because this one is just so different from her other reads. This is a thriller romance, hence why I have just put it by itself in the thriller category. This is again one of those thrillers that you will not be able to put down because you need to know the answers. I feel like the storyline of this one is a little bit too complicated, so I'm not going to go into it, but this book will take you on a roller coaster. It will creep you the heck out. Don't read this book alone at your house at night because you probably won't be able to sleep. It gives you like chills down your spine, but the only hesitation that I have about recommending this one is it is just super heavy in terms of the trigger warnings that it touches on. I've never read a book that talked about so many different disgusting, disturbing, awful topics. And obviously it's a thriller, so you're not going into it thinking it's going to be sunshine and roses, but I just want to make it very clear that this book touches on some very serious topics, and I wouldn't recommend it if you want something uplifting. It's definitely more of like a, oh my gosh, what the heck was that kind of read. Moving on to the last few novels that I have. These are for you if you want a little bit of everything. If you want some adventure, but some romance, but some riddles. If you want a story that kind of just has a bit of everything, these are for you. The first one is The Inheritance Games. This is currently a duology, but they're bringing out the third one later this year, so it's a great time to start. This one is about a teenage girl who inherits an insane amount of money, like billions upon billions of dollars, but she has no idea why she's inherited this money because she doesn't even know the guy who died and gave her the money. And the issue is he has kids and grandkids, like this whole huge family of people who expected to inherit his money and who obviously didn't. And they are not happy. But as part of the will and the inheritance, she now has to live in this house with the rest of this dead guy's family. The guy who passed away had 4 grandsons who are all kind of similar in age to the main character, and they all want to know why she inherited this money, and so does she. So they all kind of go on this like adventure, riddle, mystery situation, trying to find answers, and it is just so good. This is YA, so it's technically aimed at like a younger audience, but I had so much fun reading this, and then I convinced my mum to read it. She loved it, and she read the second book, so this is just so fun. Loved this. The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This was actually probably my favorite read from 2021. I just absolutely adored it. It has so much hype on the internet, but I personally think it's worth it, and I've convinced so many people in my life to read this book, and I would say all of them have, at least at the very minimum, thoroughly enjoyed it. Some of them have been blown away like I was, some of them haven't necessarily been blown away but still really enjoyed it, and so I feel like if that is the worst I've heard about that book, it's a great recommendation to give because most people seem to at least like it, if not really like it. The synopsis of this one is really difficult because there's so much that goes on, but it's basically about the life of Evelyn Hugo, who is a fictional Hollywood actress who becomes extremely famous, and about the life that she lives and about all of her husbands. She ends up marrying 7 different men, and it goes into why she married them and just her whole life. And I feel like no matter how I describe this book, it will never really come across as good as it is when you read it, because there's just so much more to the story, and there's also like a bit of mystery involved, and you're really trying to figure out about a certain thing and it really keeps you hooked to the end. So again, really recommend this one. I think you can get it from Kmart for like $12 now or something like that. It is just everywhere. But Taylor Jenkins Reid has quickly become one of my favorite authors. I think she is an incredible storyteller, and I think The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo is one of my favorite stories ever. And the last novel that I have to talk about is The Cruel Prince. This is again part of a 3-book series, and I definitely think reading all 3 is so worth it. There is not a bad book in the series at all. If you want to read fantasy but you're a little bit intimidated, you think it's going to be too complicated and too difficult for you to understand, read this. I've never really dived into the fantasy world, and so I was really intimidated before I started this, but I understood everything. It wasn't too complicated. It was just fun, full of adventure, full of beautiful friendships and relationships, a subplot of romance chucked in there. It was just everything. It ticked all my boxes. So love this series, and you will fly through it, I promise. Lastly, I have a few non-fiction recommendations because again, I always get questions about this. If you haven't ever really read a whole lot of non-fiction, kind of like self-development, self-improvement kind of books, Atomic Habits is a great place to start. I definitely think it deserves all of the hype that it has, and I have so many friends currently reading this and loving it, which makes me so happy because I think it is just such a great place to start in the non-fiction world. Sometimes when you go to read non-fiction, it is just so dense and like scientific, and the writing is just so hard to process and comprehend, and that is not the case with this one at all. It is super digestible. I know it looks like a big book, but it is super easy to fly through and just so practical. Everything that they talk about is so easy to apply to your life. It's great because you can read this, take the things that you think are going to work for you, leave the things that won't. Then if you've read Atomic Habits and you want something that's a little bit similar but obviously different, this is the next place to go. This is another great option if Atomic Habits looks a little bit too intimidating for you and you don't want to read a huge book, because this one is so little. This is called Eat That Frog by Brian Tracy. I really like this author. I think he has great knowledge and understanding of habits, of motivation, of all things to do with that. And this book is just absolutely packed with great information. I think this one has 21 tips that they would recommend to help you build great habits, get the best use of your time, all that sort of stuff. And I have taken so many tips from this book and applied them to my life, so can't recommend this one enough either. The Happiest Man on Earth. This one is a story of a Jewish/German man who lived an absolutely crazy life. He went through concentration camps and so much more than that, but it is one of the most inspiring books that I have ever read. If you've never read a memoir or an autobiography before, I think this is a great place to start. Very short book, very easy to read, very inspiring, and just so, I don't know, heartwarming, I guess. I feel like I have talked way too much. Hopefully I can cut this video down to a somewhat reasonable length. Honestly, I just couldn't leave any of these books out. They're all just such phenomenal reads. If you want my absolute top 3, I would say Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid, The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides, and Archer's Voice by Mia Sheridan. Those are 3 of my personal favorites and recommendations that I probably won't ever stop giving to people. So if you just have no idea where to start, probably start with those 3, or one of those 3, obviously. If you guys have any other questions about any of the books that I mentioned, or just anything else, please feel free to leave a comment down below and I'll try my best to get back to you guys. I'll try and leave some more information linked in the description box as well, in terms of where I buy my books or where I get them, where the best place to get them is based on my experience, stuff like that. And if you're new here, definitely feel free to subscribe. I'm always talking about books on my channel and I love sharing all of my recommendations with you guys. But I love you so much and I will see you in my next video very soon. Good